Hey everyone, welcome to part 64 of my Pokemon game series in Unity. So in this video, we'll implement pickups. So here we have a pickup, and if I go take it, you can see that I'll receive the item inside the pickup, and it will be added to my inventory. Alright, so let's look at how to implement this. Special thanks to all my Patreons for making this series possible. By becoming a Patreon, you can support me and get access to the complete project files of the series. The project files also contain some advanced features that are not covered on YouTube. So let's start the video. Alright, so let's create pickups. So let me open the hometown scene and I'll add the pickup in here. So let me add a new sprite and call it pickup. Let me just reset its position. And for the sprite, I'll use the Pokeball sprite. Alright, so it's not visible right now because the sorting layer is default. So I'll change it to foreground and now it should be visible. Okay, so let me place it somewhere over here and I'll make sure it's at the center of the tile. So next I'll add a box collider to it so that we can detect collisions. Alright, so if you want, you can go ahead and resize the box collider, but this looks fine to me, so I'll just leave it like that. So the pickup is something that the player can interact with, right? So just like NPC and trainer, pickup is an interactable object. So I'll put this in the interactable layer, just like we did for NPC and trainer. Okay. So next, I'll create a script for the pickups. So inside script, in inventory, I'll create a new script called pickup. Okay. Let me just get rid of this. So pickup is an interactable object, right? So it's going to implement the interactable interface. All right. Now we are having an error because we have to implement the interact function if we implement this interface, right? So I'll go ahead and implement it. All right. So to check if the interaction is working, I'll write a debug.log statement here. And we have an error here. Since this function is a coroutine, we'll have to use at least one yield return statement in this function. Or we can also use yield break. So let me just use that. And now the error should be gone. All right. So let's go to Unity and attach the script to the pickup game object. Okay, and let's test if the interaction is working. Okay, so when we test, we have this issue. The inventory UI is active by default. So let's go to our essential objects prefab. It's inside main. So let's open this prefab and let's make the inventory UI inactive by default. Okay, so now we should be able to test it. All right, and let's try interacting with the pickup. So yeah, here you can see the interaction is working. So next, when we interact with the pickup, we should get the item inside that pickup, right? So I'll create a variable to store the item in this pickup. So this will be of type item base. Okay. So next, in the interact function, we should add this item to the player's inventory, right? So if we go inside the inventory script, right now we don't have any function to add an item to the inventory. So let's create a function for that. Okay, I'll call this add item, and it'll take the item that we want to add. And we can also take the count in case we want to add more than one item. So I'll make the count optional and give it a default value of 1. All right. So in this function, we need to add the item into our item slots, right? But to get the item slots, first we need to find the category of the item. Since each category has different slots, we need to find the category first. So for that, let me create another function called get category from item. Okay, and this will take the item as the input. And by the way, this should return the item category, right? Item category is this enum over here. So if item is a recovery item, then we can return the recovery item category. So I'll return item category dot items. So yeah, recovery items is just called items, right? So let me return that category. And else if item is a Pokeball item, then I'll return item category dot Pokeballs. And otherwise, we can return item category dot TMs, since that's the only category left. Okay, so let's use this function from here to find the category of the item. So I'll call this function and pass the item as a parameter. So this will return the category as an enum, right? But what we want is the index of the category. So let me convert it into an integer and let me store it in a variable called category. All right. So next, we can use this category to find the slots of it. So we can do that by calling this function. So let me copy this and paste it over here. So now we have the slots. So next, we need to check if this item already has a slot in the current slots. So for that, I'll say current slots dot first or default, and we need to find the slot with the item equal to the item that we are trying to add, right? So let me store this in a variable called item slot. So if this item already has a slot, then it will return it. Otherwise, it will return null. Okay. So next we can check if the item slot is not equal to null. Then that means the item already has a slot. So all we have to do is just increase the count of the slot. Okay. So I'll say item slot dot count plus or equal to the count that we want to add. Otherwise, if this item doesn't have a slot, then we'll have to add a new slot for it, right? So I'll add a new slots to the current slots by using the add function. All right. So we need to specify the item and the count while creating a new slot. So we have an error over here. So it's because the item property doesn't have a setter right now. So let's add a setter for this property. So I'll define it in this way and define getter and setter. All right. So now the error should be gone. So we have added the item to the inventory. So once we add, we need to call the onUpdated event so that the changes will be reflected in the UI. All right. So I'm going to invoke this event, and that's all we have to do. Now we can call this function to add an item to the inventory. So let's go to the pickup script, and inside the interact function, we can add the item to the player's inventory. So we can get the inventory from the initiator. The initiator will be the player, right? So I'll say initiator dot get component inventory. So this will give us the inventory, and now we can call the add item function and pass the item. Okay, so this will add the item to the inventory, but we need to handle one thing. We should not be able to use this pickup multiple times, right? So I'll create a Boolean property called used. So this property will be false by default, and we only want to use the pickup if it's not already used, right? So I'll check if the value of used is false, and only then I'll add the item to the inventory. Okay, and once we add the item, we can set used to true so that it can't be used again. And we also need to destroy this pickup, right? We don't want to see the pickup in the scene anymore. So to destroy a game object, you can use the destroy function, but I don't want to use that. The reason is because when we save the game, we should be able to save whether the pickup is used or not, right? So if you destroy the pickup, then you won't be able to save its state. So instead of destroying it, I'll just disable its sprite renderer so that we won't be able to see it in the game. Okay, so I'll use get component to get the sprite renderer, and I'll just disable it. All right, and I'll also disable the box collider of the pickup so that the tile will be walkable. Okay, and finally, we need to show a dialog saying the player found this item. So let me do that. By the way, this should be false since we want to disable it. So let me change both of them to false. All right. So let's go to Unity and test this. So in the pickup, we need to assign an item. So let's say this pickup has max potion inside it. So I'll choose max potion for the item. So let's test this. Okay. So right now, if we look at the inventory, we only have one max potion. But if I go and take this pickup, okay, we have an error. So I found the issue after some debugging. So if you click on this error, you can see this is the line that is causing the issue. So the issue is when we try to access the height of the item slot UI, it returns a null reference exception because rect transform is null. So let me explain what's happening. So in the inventory, once we add an item, we are calling the on updated event. So this will update the item in the UI. So if we look at the inventory UI script, here you can see when on updated event is invoked, it will call the update item list function. So this function will delete all the item slot UI and it will create new ones. Okay. So what's happening is when we are doing this, we are trying to access the height before the rect transform is assigned from the awake. Okay. So because of that, rect transform is still null and we'll get a null reference exception. So we need to make sure this line is executed before we use the height property. Okay. So how can we do that? So here you can see right after creating the item slot UI, we are calling the set data function, right? So if you move this line into the set data function, then we can ensure that the rect transform will be assigned right after it's created. Okay, so that should solve the issue for us. So let's go to Unity and test. All right, so as you can see that we only have one max portion in the inventory. So now I'll try to pick up this item. All right, so that worked. We don't have the null reference exception anymore. And now if we check our inventory, you can see that we have two max portions. All right, so the pickup is working fine, but there is an issue that we need to fix. So let me show you the issue. So when I pick up this item, this dialog will be shown. And when this dialog is shown, I'll still be able to walk around. Okay, so let's look at why that's happening. So let's look at our code for showing dialogs. So here we are using ShowDialogText function. And in this function, we are not invoking the on show dialog and on close dialog events. Okay, so if you look at the show dialog function, that shows multiple lines of dialogue. Here we are doing it, right? Here we are invoking both the events, but we are not doing the same in show dialog text function. So let's go to the game controller script and check what these events are doing. All right. So here you can see when this event is fired, we are changing the state to dialogue. So if we don't change the state, then the player will still be able to move. Okay. So we should call that even in the show dialog text function. The reason why we didn't call it until now is because until now we were just using it from the inventory UI. So we didn't have to worry about the player moving when the dialog is shown. But now, since we are using it from the pickup, we have to make sure to invoke the on show and on close events. Okay. So at the start, I'll invoke the on show dialog event. All right. And when we close the dialog, I'll invoke the on close dialog event. All right. So one thing to note is that in the game controller, when on close dialog is fired, we are just changing the state back to free roam, right? But we can't do this now because now we are also showing the dialog in the inventory UI, right? So in that case, it should go back to the back state instead of going back to the free roam state. Okay, so what we have to do is Before changing the state to dialog, we have to store the previous state in a variable, and then we have to restore the state from on close dialog. Okay, so let me create a variable to store the previous state. Actually, we can use this variable over here. We are using this variable to store the previous state before we pause the game. So we can use the same variable before we show a dialog. Okay, so let me just rename this to something like previous state so that it's more clear. And then in the show dialog function, before changing the state, I'll store it to the previous state variable. And in the on close dialog, instead of changing the state back to free roam, I'll just change it back to the previous state. All right. So that should fix our problem. So let's go to Unity and try testing this. Okay, so let me go take the pickup. All right. So now when the dialog is being shown, I can't walk when I press the arrow keys. Okay. But once the dialog closes, we can walk like usual. So that is working fine. So I'll stop the video here. If you think this video is helpful, please leave a like and consider subscribing to my channel. That'll really help me out. So I'll see you in the next video.